Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast with your hosts, Jason Science and Dr. Clint McCoy.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 139. I am minus Dr. Clint McCoy today. He's actually in surgery till late this afternoon. He'd been self-quarantining, which has worked out great for him in the Illinois opener this year, but he had to go back to work today. I've got a great guest today, and one that probably doesn't need a whole lot of introduction if you've spent any time reading or watching any of the TV shows, and that's Tracker John. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Jason. How about yourself?
I'm doing well also. It's 70 some degrees, which isn't necessarily the best hunting weather, but it's a beautiful day in Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's 80 some degrees here in Illinois, and it's pretty much shut things down. For a while there, things were just smoking. My phone was nonstop. The arrows were flying, but then this hot weather's hit and shut it.
We have lost John. Let me call him back.
I've got you. I've got you now.
There we
dropped
go.
out for a second there.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know what the deal is.
That's okay. You and I texted back and forth here a while ago, and it really was a perfect storm in terms of an opener for at least, getting big deer on their feet.
I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah.
It was just like peak crazy.
Yeah, it's been just watching social media, you can tell. You can always tell when a cold front's come through. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, it happened, and big bucks too. I've already been on the trails for a couple over 180.
Wow. Would you say that in your experience, outside of the normal dates during the rut, that you're just going to be busy because those are the days of the calendar?
Pre-rut too.
Pre-rut too. Would you say that it definitely is a noticeable difference when the weather's right? In other words, barometric pressure's high, or I don't know whether you pay attention to that, but let's just say that you've got a cold front, so and the cooler temperatures have come in, and maybe I think that makes a big difference in the pre-rut. I'm wondering if you see an uptick, so to speak, in business, if you will, during times like that. Okay.
Yeah, I would say generally so, although certainly there have been times, and I deal with a handful of outfitters, and there's certainly times that, we're thinking, oh gosh, this week is just going to be killer. Everything's lining up. This is right, and then nothing. And there's been the odd time too where things don't look like they're all that special, and then it really happens. But by and large, what you're saying, yeah, is true. You can see it coming, and it happens, and it's just noticeable. It's like, just, you want to know what's going on, just ask me how my phone is doing. And sometimes it's just like somebody has hit the switch and there it goes, and now this warm weather's hit and somebody's turned it right back off again. It's dramatic. And what's interesting sometimes to me is just how far spread it is. Like my phone will be dead, and then all of a sudden here it comes, and it's calls from like 3 different states asking if I can come.
Yikes.
So it's interesting.
Do you travel often out of, I know you came and helped us in Missouri. Do you travel often outside of Illinois?
I don't know if I would call it often or not, but I do travel some when I'm able. I'm in Western Illinois here. I'm in a pretty good hot spot, so generally there's enough work here to keep me busy, and I can only do so much, and so I don't have to travel, and sometimes I can't travel just due to the volume of work I've got here. So it can be difficult for me to stretch out and travel, but certainly I have and do.
Well, one thing that people may not know is it's not like you can freelance, as I understand it. You have you have some folks that are at the top of your list because they've earned that spot in one way or another. So you have to sort of be responsible to your home crowd, so to speak, first, right?
Exactly. As I mentioned, I've got a small handful of outfitters that I'm responsible for, and so I basically do all their stuff. And then, if I'm not busy with any of those people, then I'll take outside calls.
Sure.
But yeah, basically, I've already got my client list, and so I'm pretty much dealing with a known group of people, and not to say that I don't get a few more new people, and I get them strictly through referrals. I don't have any of my contact information out there because I really can't handle that much more, and I'd just be so deluged with calls that I would just have to be saying no to. I just really, unfortunately, don't have time for it, because if somebody calls, even if I'm too busy, I try to walk them through what as best I can as to how I would handle the particular situation that they've got going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that alone can be time consuming. So that's, I've got a pretty big client base, and it keeps me pretty busy by and large.
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason that I met you, or the how I met you, was this last year. I was filming a hunt down in Missouri at Joe Ogden's place at Indian Hills, and we had a deer that the person that I was filming, Jack, had shot, and we really thought it was a lethal hit to begin with, just because it appeared as though his leg was broke when he was running away. I don't remember if you got that video or not.
Yes, I did.
But we thought it was pretty mortal, and you came out, and well, I mean, I guess I'd never worked with a tracker before. It was probably one of the most educational experiences I've had afield. I learned a lot of lessons that day, and the one that I learned the most is that your dog knows what it's doing. Number one, and number two is what you think you see isn't always what you see. And
yes, both of those things are true, but I guess I'd add also that sometimes what you see doesn't produce the result that you think it would.
Right.
That absolutely happens.
I think,
which is different than, I thought I saw this, but it was really something else.
right.
Sometimes things look dang good, and just the bullet or the arrow just threads the needle, and somehow or another doesn't cut or impact what it needs to, and you just don't get the lethal result that you would generally think you would, looking at the hit. And I would say that was true that day that we met.
Yeah.
It was a pretty interesting track, actually. It was a little unique in a few ways.
It was, as I remember it, it was, I guess, one of the coolest things that I saw is I watched you work with your dog, and you paid close attention to what it's doing, and you're reading the dog, it seems like, as much as probably the dog's reading the sign. But what was so cool about that whole thing is it seemed to me that if I could put it in human personality, it would be as though you think you're on the right track, but you just want to make sure, and your dogs seem to go back down all the way around and downwind, and kind of got back on the track as I remember it. And it seemed like at that point she just, and I think we may have even talked about it, it seemed like at that point, it's a she, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it seemed like she just decided, yep, this is the best I've got. I'm going with it. And it was that, to me, was in and of itself what made me a believer, because I have to be honest with you, at first I'm like, yeah, I don't know about this. I kept thinking to myself, and maybe this is a question you can answer. We weren't finding any blood. What was she tracking?
Okay, yeah. So to enlighten your listeners on this particular track, as you said, it appeared like the deer's leg was broken from the shot. It was a muzzleloader, wasn't it?
It was.
Muzzleloader shot?
It was, yes.
And as I recall, it was a slight quartering away angle, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you would think that with a broken leg, there would at least be some blood to see. And as I recall, we did not see a single drop from start to finish. And what I believe probably happened was with the quartering shot, I would say the leg was probably impacted at the elbow or the shoulder, someplace where bone is very near the surface. And so a lot of meat was not cut or blown up, not produce much bleeding. Because generally, with a leg hit or something like that, bleeding that happens is going to end up on the ground. It's not like a chest shot where you could have all internal bleeding and a large extent of bleeding. You're not going to see much or any on the ground. With a leg hit or flesh hit, something like that, naturally what's bleeding, it's not in the chest cavity, so it's more or less got to drop to the ground other than what little is going to be absorbed by the fur. And we got none of that. So that's why it was pretty baffling initially. And kind of wondering what is going on here? And then I think the dog thought the same, because as it turns out, that deer was not dead. And so it, wasn't smelling to my dog like dead deer walking. There's no blood on the ground. So when she was starting, we didn't really have anything for her. And we had an idea where the deer kind of ran based on the video, but we didn't know exactly. So it was a little tough to put her on. And like you say, so she's working, and if she's not grabbing a lot, she's going to check. And then also, if you remember, she did veer, I think that circle that you were talking about, there was parts of another dead deer over there.
That's
remember,
right.
found that
I do remember. Yes.
Skin and parts of deer.
Yep.
So that, no doubt, she circled over to check that out, then rejected that, came circling back around, and just like you said, it's kind of like at that point, well, this is all I got. I guess we're going to go with this. That's, the dog always checks to make sure there's not, when it's a faint scent or not a lot of blood or not a lot of damage has been done, to always check to make sure it's not some secondary blown scent or something that she's on and that she's missing the main core of the scent. So the dog's going to circle, and then, as in this case, that was all there was. And then it's like, well, this is it. This is what we're going with. But that does make it kind of curious because, like you say, especially I know how reliable my dog is, but somebody like yourself that's never even worked with a dog before and doesn't know, it's like, well, this dog's taking us for a walk.
Right. Yeah, I've been around bird dogs a lot in my younger years and did a lot of that training, and I guess I should have known better than to doubt the dog. But it was just, I just kept thinking, how could there was a bazillion deer that came out into that field that night. How does she know this is him? But clearly she did, and it was pretty fun to watch.
Well, just because there's no blood on the ground doesn't mean that there isn't blood sent for the dog to follow. Molecules of scent are still drifting down off the deer, wherever they might land, depending on the wind or whatever. But you do not have to have visible blood drops, as you've seen, for the dog to be able to follow. And I do have a very, very reliable dog, which you really got to have, and to be able to work trails like this where you got the confidence to go with the dog. I mean, when we were hung up on that fence line where you had to stop and get permission to go over on the neighboring property, I mean, that was a pretty big leap of faith. We've gone all the way that far, seeing absolutely nothing.
Right.
And then there's this fairly tall fence that clearly the deer would have had to go over, like my dog was indicating. I was like, well, I don't know if this really makes sense with a deer that we thought had its leg pretty well broken. But she was right.
Yeah, she was. And it seemed like once we crossed that fence, you got a lot more feedback out of her, didn't you?
Yeah. So whether we were closing the time differential, in other words, it was less time had elapsed from that point of the trail from when we began. In other words, if the deer had lingered or spent time somewhere up to the fence or shortly beyond, and then so when we get beyond that point, then the trail actually is a little fresher. So whether it was that or sometimes change in vegetation and whatnot can make a huge change as to what the dog is able to scent. And we did have some different vegetation cover and grass and field after the fence. So that may have helped the cause, although going down those mowed roadways, that could have been a little bit challenging, but she at that point she was pretty well locked on and pretty much zipped it out.
Yeah, she did a fabulous
There's
job.
just so many variables. It just stays fascinating to me, even though I've been doing it going on 4 decades now.
Wow.
We've been on a few trails.
Would it be fair to say that the only Dan Infalt, a guy that I often have a conversation with at one point or another during the year, always says the only absolute about deer hunting, and I would think you could add tracking deer, is that there is no absolute. I would imagine that there are. One
of my favorite sayings is almost anything is possible. There are so many variables, and then as we were discussing earlier, the hits that you just would never imagine that deer could go more than 200 yards with. Sometimes they do. Just weird stuff happens. So I don't count on anything.
Right.
Nothing. I'm always second guessing everything, including my dog. Very reliable dog, but what if she's wrong 1 out of 500 times or something? Well, is that 1 out of 500 time? So even I got a question. I'm always analyzing, and I want to stack all the evidence that I can before I make a decision that, I think we're going to get this deer, or this is hopeless, we're now going to pull the plug.
Does it take quite a bit? Does it take quite a bit for you to pull the plug?
It takes, I guess you'd say that it takes quite a bit. It takes, as I said, I want to have multiple pieces of evidence pointing in a direction. For example, say somebody shoots a deer and there's almost no blood on the arrow. Well, that doesn't look good. But have I found deer that had almost no blood or no blood on the arrow? Yes, I have. But that's rare. Okay, but so that's one thing kind of pointing in a bad direction.
Sure.
But then let's say you have a bunch of muscle-like looking blood, but a lot, but then it tapers down to next to nothing within a few hundred yards. Well, that's kind of a bad sign too. And so I want to be stacking all these things, including how I'm reading my dog and what her reaction is to the known trail, that was the part I put her on before the point of loss, and then what we've done since then. So I like to have half a dozen pieces of information before I make the call.
Would it be fair to say that the feedback that you're getting from your dog is probably going to play or weight that your decision the most heaviest, I guess, would be is that going to be one of the biggest things that you're watching?
it's definitely a heavy factor for sure.
Sure.
But don't forget, in making that evaluation, I'm thinking about what the hit is believed to be, what the weather conditions are, how long it's been since the hit, what's been done to the trail already. So there's a whole pile of variables that I got to calculate in to analyze what my dog is doing. And all those things can factor how my dog's reacting. So it's kind of a tricky proposition, really.
Yeah, I mean, it gets.
But I've been doing it so much that
yeah,
I've got a pretty good idea.
Not all dog trackers are created equal, and I'm sure there's some really good ones out there. And I've only worked with one, and I think I probably worked with I guess what I would consider the best. And I know you're not here to get patted on the back or anything, but let's talk real quick about since you can't be everywhere for everyone. What are some things that you would look for if you're? Where would you point someone to get a dog or a tracker like yourself? In once you found one, what attributes or what characteristics would you look for in that person? Is there?
Well, I suppose in a lot of ways it's no different than any other activity or profession or sport or whatever. Somebody that's gung-ho and is totally in it and has been in it for a long time is probably going to be a better bet than somebody who hasn't been doing it so long. That, I would say, is just kind of common sense. Because there is a lot to it. There's a lot more to it than I think a lot of people would believe. I like to say to find the easy ones, it's pretty easy. Easier probably than most people might think. It's easy to have some success with tracking with a dog. But the really tough ones, those I think are harder than what many people would believe. So it's, I would look, if it's serious and you really want to get your deer, I would kind of look for somebody that has a lot of experience and a proven track record. I don't think it would be any different than choosing somebody in any other field.
No, I would agree with you. That's probably best put. Time.
Now, how many of those guys are out there? I don't know. I'm kind of a one-man show here, so I don't really get too involved with any of the tracking groups or whatever that are out there. But I guess that would be where you'd have to go, unless you've got somebody that's referring somebody to you that they had great luck with, or feel that meet the requirements, and then obviously that would be where to go.
Yeah, that
because I have to say, lately I have run into some tracks, either new clients or even mostly I think these were new clients that maybe I was busy and they tried somebody else first, and some of the things didn't turn out so well, and then they called me later and begged me to come in after the fact and try to see what we could do. But I could tell just from unfortunately so tell from what they were describing to me, what had been done, or what some of the philosophy was with some of these guys, that they really didn't have it. And I'm not knocking anybody. Everybody's got to start someplace. But if it's a bucket of a lifetime or something that's a must-have, then it's a little different scenario.
Right. Yeah, it's worth waiting for.
Now, yeah, and I don't know that it should be. I suppose ethically you could make an argument, well, the smallest doe should receive the same attention as a 220-inch buck, but let's be honest, that's not the way it works. And somebody's going to go to a lot more measures to get that 220-inch buck than, some meat animal that their attitude, and again, maybe not right, but kind of probably leans this way. Is like, well, I'll just shoot another doe or something.
Right. I mean, yeah, and like you said, let's be honest. We both know, how those stories end. If it is, not a 220-inch animal, it is what it is, and there's nothing that we're going to do to change it. We could probably sit and talk about the ethics of that all day, but that's a different show, and I don't know. That's one I want to do.
Okay, sorry, I got you down that line.
Right. When you showed up that day,
you can cut me off at any time.
Okay. You showed up that day, and you had, I'm not going to say a zoo inside your vehicle, but you had a couple different animals. One was a raven, if I remember correctly, right?
That is correct. I call it a small raven. It's actually named an African pied crow, but genetically it's most closely related to northern raven. You cannot legally, absolutely no way, can you possess a native crow or a raven. So hence I had to get what's considered an exotic, non-native variety, and so that's why I have what I've got. Yeah, I love that thing. It's awesome. I love flying that thing.
And what do you use? What do you use it for?
Well, the original goal was to have the bird searching from the air while we were on the ground with the dog, or in certain scenarios anyway.
Sure.
And I still think that that's a viable technique. But here's the thing that I just love that bird so much. If something happened to it, I'd be devastated. And he's so bonded to me that I'm reluctant to just turn him loose in places I'm not familiar with. And there's just in the fall, in the Midwest here, there's just so many owls and hawks and eagles.
Sure.
And every time he's in the air, he's vulnerable. So probably I will not probably end up doing too much of what I originally got him for. I'm just having too much fun otherwise, and it's I just don't want to take the risk. I mean, I cut him loose and he flies over the next field and there's some guy with a shotgun or who knows what. Just bad things could happen. So I prefer the free flying that I do with him, which basically I'm just doing for fun, and it's because he loves it. And, I'm very careful about watching the area before I turn them loose, make sure the crows aren't acting up with hawks or something or other, and try to make it as safe as possible and just have fun with it that way. Probably at some point I'll decide, yep, I got to at least find one or two deer with them just to pull it off and say I did it. But I don't think I'm going to risk them. And the bottom line is the thing's dead. I'm going to get with my bloodhound almost in all cases. I mean, there's always exceptions. I would never say I get everything or I couldn't make a mistake, but odds are, and the bird probably could speed things up sometimes, but it's probably unlikely that it'll totally make a difference and get something that my dog would not have. I guess it could happen, but probably unlikely.
It would seem to me that that's a very situational use animal. I mean, the conditions would have to be pretty specific for.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
And obviously I can't use him at night like I can the dogs.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to use them too well when it's raining. So yes, it would be definitely very limited. But I'll be honest, the reason I undertook it wasn't so much because I felt I needed it, just that it's just awesome. And I'm not sorry because I've had so much fun with this bird, and he's so bonded to me, and he talks, and it's just entertaining and watching him with the dogs.
That's
yeah,
cool. That's cool.
He tells me he loves me.
That's great.
I'm serious.
That's awesome.
So we have a lot of fun. I had the bird in the truck, and then I think I had the Janie and Willa, two bloodhounds.
Yep. Yep, and one's the younger dog that you're.
Yeah, Willa's the younger one. Yeah,
Sure.
Janie's the machine. She's the big gun that I usually pick, just because when somebody's big trophy is on the line, it's hard not to reach for the big gun.
Right. Well, it would seem that would make sense.
Although there were a few times last year. I mean, Willis found some deer and some big deer, and she actually saved the day a couple of times last year when Janie just wasn't getting it done. I think I had to switch out to Willa, and Willa got it done. So I've got great hopes for Willa. She's probably got one of the best noses of any of the dogs I've ever had. So she's got the talent. She's just a live wire. She just needs to settle down just a little bit more. She's starting to settle now. She's 2.5.
Okay.
Just another year or so, and I think we'll really be in business.
Yeah, I think in my dog training days, it seemed like right around year 3, sometimes 4, they really sort of came into their own, and from then on, it was a pretty steady result. I don't know if it's the same with bloodhounds or not, but
I would say usually we're kind of settled in the zone before that. But Willa is a little bit exceptional in that she's for a bloodhound. I would say bloodhounds are kind of a medium energy dog. They're not the lay on the porch, lazy thing you see on the TV shows.
Sure.
I'd say they're medium energy, but Willa's high energy. She's 24/7, and so she's just going to take a little longer, I think, to settle in than some of the others. Now, Jessie, my famous dog, who's no longer with us, but she actually, due to some unfortunate circumstances where the dog ahead of her died of an autoimmune disease pretty young, actually 2 of them did. So she got forced into action when she was a year and a half old. And I'll tell you, that dog hit the ground running, virtually made no mistakes, and then worked 11 years with me. I'll never have a run like that again, I'm sure. But she settled in early and was just awesome. So they're all individuals, you know that from working with bird dogs. They're all a little different.
They sure are. They all present a challenge at some point.
just like people, they're all a little different.
They sure are. I guess one thing that I'd like to ask, and we talked about it a little bit that day when you did the track for Jack. What are some of the biggest mistakes that could be easily avoided that hurt your chances of finding a deer? And when I say I mean the hunter's chances of having that dog have success.
Well, again, there's varying levels of commitment to finding a deer. If you absolutely have to get the deer, want to get the deer, want to stack all the odds in your favor that you possibly can, the time to call the guy with the dog, if you've got somebody, would be the moment you know you've got a situation. Rather than eating the trail up and blind certain stumbling all over and hoping against hope that you're just going to luck into it.
Right.
As soon as you know you got a problem, that's the time to call the handler. And now, once you just talk to the handler, you might discuss, when to go in. You might give it more time, or maybe you need to jump on it. But either way, you're going to be going about things optimally, and rather than beating the trail up, possibly jumping the deer, pushing it, and creating a lot of other disturbance on the trail that now the dog's going to have to work through. And not only trail the deer, but try to separate out whatever the hunters have done and the disturbance they've done. And if it was one of those trails where the deer bled heavily to begin with and then tapered off to nothing, well, when it was heavy, were the guys walking in the blood? And then once they go beyond that, so they've got blood on the bottom of their boots, trace amounts, and they're laying these little secondary trails, which, if the deer is really smelling seriously wounded, I call it dead deer walking. Mm-hmm. It might not make any difference. It does, whatever the guys have done that, there's so much scent coming off that deer, and the dog's just going to walk and blow right through and not even pay any attention to what everybody's done in those little secondary trails, because they're minimal compared to what's coming off the deer. But if it's a little more superficial, or it's something that's got to take a while, well, maybe there isn't yet that much scent coming off the deer, and it's a little trickier to trail it. So we don't need any more complications to the difficulty that's already there. So that would be a big thing. But again, is it a deer that you want to put every single effort into? Because by calling somebody in early, you do run the risk of, maybe you would have stumbled on the deer. Maybe it is only another 50 yards beyond where you're having trouble. So by stacking the odds as much as possible, probably at some point you are going to call the dog in when it's really not needed. But you've covered all your bets. You haven't heard anything in case that's not the scenario. And a lot of the people I'm dealing with that, you're talking trophy bucks. Well, you don't want to mess around. You do want to stack everything in your favor, and even if it is going to be throwing the dog a bone occasionally. So that, I guess that makes a difference depending on, what the deer is to the person.
Sure. What would you say is, I guess, let me just back up and pick your brain for a second. You said, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is essentially, I think what I heard you say is not calling you soon enough. I guess, give me a situation that you maybe have encountered more than once, where people should have known to call. And they made it harder on you, I guess. Just in an effort to
gut shots are a pretty common one for people to mess up on, because they can take so long. You never know. A gut shot could take 24 plus hours. I've seen plenty of them like that, or more. Or you could have gotten lucky and picked up an artery or a good spot on the liver, and so it's a combination of things, and the deer's dead in an hour. But if it's a known gut shot, you can't count on that. Maybe it's the case, but so it's kind of a tricky situation. You as to when to go in. The safest bet for actually recovering your trophy would be to wait. And so a lot of times people don't wait, or they don't wait long enough, and they go in and they end up jumping the thing. And once you've jumped it again and the adrenaline's going, there's no telling how far the thing might go, or the risk is it could go on to somebody else's property where maybe you can't get permission. So all kinds of bad things can happen. But going too soon is probably a common mistake, I would say.
It would seem to me, and this is just me, that if I'm thinking about calling Tracker John, that would be, I guess, my first inclination about calling you. The first time I thought about it would be the time that I would stop, and it would seem to me that would probably be a good rule of thumb to go by. If your gut's telling you to stop and call a tracking dog, or a handler with a tracking dog, that's probably the time you should stop. Because when you start to have
doubt,
doubts,
back out.
yeah,
right. That's a pretty good rule. It's going to save you more than not. There are certain hits where waiting, and if a dog is involved, so you're fairly confident you can follow it without losing it, you might actually want to push it. For example, the leg hit that we were trailing, that's a leg hit generally is one that waiting big periods of time isn't advantageous. Sometimes it's better to keep on it and keep it bleeding. Of course, that was a weird one that we did together, and there was no blood at all.
Right.
So that didn't really fit that bill. That was unusual. But again, that goes back to what I said, that then the handler can advise how best to handle the trail, whether it be jumping on it or whether, no, we got to wait another 6 hours or 10 hours or something like that. And, and again, even that is tricky because you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. Now, if you've got an arrow and it's, you've got gut material on it, well, it's gut shot, but you don't really know what else it might be besides gut shot. So my thinking there is, well, you just pretend, or you just act like it's strictly gut shot and nothing else, and then you're covering your odds.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I would think that as a hunter, you should prepare for your maximum needs, not your minimum needs when it comes to tracking a deer. Like if there's a question and you're able to mitigate some of that trouble by calling you or waiting, whatever the case may be, or calling another handler, it would, that's the thing to do right then and there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, what throws that off just a little bit is getting back to what was the deer. Now, obviously, in temperatures like this, or where there's a bunch of coyotes around, well, waiting can jeopardize your meat. So you got to weigh that against going too early and bumping the deer and maybe losing everything. So it kind of goes back to, well, is this that big trophy buck where the antlers have a value in and of themselves? So if the meat was lost, or if it was such that it was a little idiot to my dog instead, at least you still have your antlers. Or if it's a small buck or a doe and strictly a meat animal, well, then you might push it a little sooner than what you would otherwise. So there's that element in determining too. But again, I'm almost exclusively working with people who've shot giant deer or big deer, big and giant to them anyways.
Speaking of giants, have you seen the picture of that deer this year?
The one we tracked?
Yeah.
No, Joe sent me a photo of the shed, which was probably in beginning of March or something like that.
Yeah.
But why they've got a photo of it?
John, he just blew. I can't believe it. He just blew into a giant as a 7 or 8 year old deer. He grew exponentially. I mean, he blew up this year, and I'm actually going there the 28th. I hope I don't have to call you, but if I do, at least we'll know each other.
That would be a pretty awesome story, though, wouldn't it?
It would be a great story. Let's hope it doesn't end that way, but I'll definitely let you know if I get him.
I don't know. That wouldn't be so bad. We'd get the pose over the giant. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, he's just a monster 8-pointer. When they sent me the picture, I knew right away it was the deer because I knew the frame, because I'd seen him enough to know what he was going to look like. But I'd never expected that many inches to have grown. He's still an 8-pointer, but I'm going down there this year. So is Jack. Jack's going to go back with his dad, and we're going to hunt. I'm going to hunt there twice this year, in archery season and in the muzzleloader season. I think that that deer is probably not going to make it to the muzzleloader season, but who knows? Just because of how big he is. I think that deer last year, a lot of folks that come into Joe's operation aren't there for a deer like that. They're there for something much bigger. And Jack was absolutely, would have been tickled to get it, and will be tickled if he does end up with it. But Jack's he's going to be second in line, I guess, this year. But I look forward to going over and doing that.
Yeah, Joe's a great guy. He calls me in from time to time when they've got an issue, and if I can, I really do my best to get over there and try to help him out. But I am so happy to hear about that deer's still up and bigger, because when they found the shed, I was still a little concerned that, okay, well, he lived long enough to shed, but the rest of the winter was still in front of him. He didn't know how that would go, whether he'd make it through. So that he did, and then that he got even bigger. That's really pretty incredible. I guess probably my guessing about what the hit was probably pretty accurate. Somehow it hit to mess up the bone a little bit, but it was able to heal, and he still got bigger.
Yeah, when I got home from that hunt, and for whatever reason, I didn't bring. I have a Mac computer, and of course, everything Apple takes a stupid dongle or whatever they're called, and I'd forgot it. So I wasn't able to look at it through the program that I would normally look at a hit through. And when I was able to slow it down, I could see that hit was not only quartering away, but even if it would have been broadside, very far forward. You could absolutely see the ripple, and I could drill down on it pretty good because it was 4K, so that allows me to zoom in on it quite a bit. And I was curious to get your opinion, if you thought that it just simply maybe dislocated the shoulder or something like that, because of the way that leg was flailing around when he was running away.
Yeah. I mean, it could have totally been broken.
Yeah.
And the deer I shot myself years and years ago with my recurve, I shot this buck and looked perfectly fine. When it ran off, to be a norm gate, and I didn't realize anything was wrong with it until I butchered it. And in the hind quarter, the bone had been soaked totally. It snapped right in half, and then slid alongside itself by like a few inches. So it was just laying up alongside it, and then it had like calcified all around it. So its leg was actually 4 or 5 inches shorter than the other one because it was overlapped like that. So I mean, they're incredible with what they can recover from. So I guess I would have to guess Jack's was something like that. But what helped the cause was there just wasn't a lot of tissue damage as well.
Right.
Because wasn't that correct? You guys never even found one speck of blood.
Not
before I got there.
Nothing. All we had to go on was, absent that video, things could have, been a lot harder. And just because of having the video, we were able to see exactly where he ran in, and I was able to tell you exactly where he ran in, and so we had a pretty good idea that she was on. I'm sure you did. You had a good idea that she was on the right track, just based on what we had seen in that video. And I don't imagine you always have a video to go on.
No, I mean, it's nice when you do, but sure. And I do with a certain frequency because I have to deal with some TV show guys.
Sure.
But even in Jack's case, there, once it got around that point and entered the woods, we weren't too sure. I mean, we knew it was about where it had gone through, but we didn't know too closely just whether the deer or where the dog was in relation to where the deer had actually ran. And then the other thing is with a hit like that where nothing is dripping to the ground and the dog's just working on scent that's drifting off the deer. So that's not a real definitive line. It's more drifted scent. So now the dog's got to kind of sort through. And there was a lot of stuff in that section of woods, and so the dog's got to work through all that. And then again, that piece of dead deer that was in the area too. So it was a little bit to lock on at first.
Sure. Well, I've taken a bunch of your time, and probably we could talk all afternoon. But I've got a couple other questions that I want to ask. And
okay, well, before you get to those, Jason, let me just interject another part or another answer to the question about what to do before the dog or whatever. One thing that a lot of guys don't do, which I sure wish they would, makes things a whole lot better. They are trailing when the blood starts to get scarce. They should be marking it. Mark it with toilet paper, or it's biodegradable, or whatever. But mark it once, and when I start the dog, I can see the dog is on what was known before we get to the problem spot.
Sure.
I can. It gives me an opportunity to read my dog as how she's working that known portion. Get a feel for how easily or with what difficulty she is working what was known. I can get a lot of information before we get to the problem spot, and where they've lost blood, it might be the deer is backtracked. It might have gone off at a funny angle. Maybe it is just that the bleeding is. I like to have as good as possible before last blood. Marking really does help things.
So essentially, I think what you're telling me is that you're verifying that she's connecting the dots like we've connected the dots prior to you getting there.
That and how she's connecting the dots.
Okay.
And how easily or with what difficulty she's connecting the dots.
And how is the how important to you?
I can better understand then how she's like following beyond last blood.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, it's all, there's so many variables that affect the way things go down so if I know how she's working prior to the trail having been lost, I can then better interpret what she's doing once we get beyond last known.
Gotcha. Okay.
And have a better idea with what difficulty going to be needing to work to follow beyond last known. And then I'll have a better clue, if that changes, maybe something's changed on the trail, or just lots to interpret.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to mention before I hit you with the last couple?
I think that's the main answer to that question. I think that's it.
Okay. I guess I hadn't really thought of what you just mentioned. How important it would be to mark that trail and because it's not so much you marking.
Actually, I think it's a good idea, even if you don't have a dog involved in it.
Right.
It's helpful.
Right. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it's not necessarily at that point, it's not necessarily for the dog. It's for you as much as it is for anything, because you're able to, I guess, get a better grasp on what it is that they're picking up on and making sure it's the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I
Exactly.
guess it's something I hadn't thought of. I guess the easiest way to ask you this next question is to just ask what you would use. And I know it's a hot topic with everybody, but I've got to ask it. If you were going to use a compound bow, would you shoot a mechanical or a fixed broadhead, assuming you shot 50 pounds?
Well, that's interesting. I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody, and not to be evasive, but you tell me whereabouts you're going to hit the deer, and then I'll tell you which broadhead to use. I mean, it varies. You're gonna put one through the soft tissues of the stomach, or you're gonna flirt with the shoulder or some heavy bone. Absolutely different answer for those two things. There really is no perfect broadhead. I mean, if I'm gonna get a call on a stomach shot or something, I love to hear that some mechanicals been used where it cuts a big old hole and helps the cause. But if you're going to use the mechanical, I would definitely stay off the shoulder and not be flirting with any bone, because that's probably not going to end very well.
Right.
If 50 pounds isn't going to be able to punch through bone, well, yeah, then a fixed blade. I'm going to want a heavy arrow. And in either of those scenarios, which is critical and probably the biggest thing, I think, the biggest advantage would be an arrow that is perfectly tuned. So all the energy is aligned right in line with the shaft and the broadhead, and so all that energy is going to go to penetration. Rather, if you got a little wagging on the arrow and you're kind of slapping the deer and it scrubs off a lot of the energy, and you're not going to get the same kind of penetration. So a perfectly tuned arrow, in my opinion, is critical for maximum performance.
Okay.
So I guess I evaded your question.
Well, no, I think you answered it exactly how if I had a hope of how you would answer it, unless you had some, groundbreaking, earth-shattering news that I hadn't heard. I think that's the right answer, because it does matter where you hit it. It's situational. There's a lot of people that are in love with, mechanical broadheads that, cut 2 1/4 inches that are shooting 45 pounds. Well, that's great if you hit them, 6 inches back of the shoulder blade.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Right.
Outside of that, you're flirting with
trouble.
And
even then, it's kind of a little light for a huge mechanical.
Exactly. So it is situational, and there's tons of good products out there, and I hear a lot of talk about, mechanicals this or fix that, and I just don't think, basically like you alluded to, that there's a one size fits all. It is situational. It's
Well, and some of the bad rap that the mechanicals get. Now, I'm not going to deny that sometimes there's failure,
sure.
But I don't think the failure is anywhere as close to what a lot of people believe. I think what's really happening is shots are like I was talking about earlier, just thread the needle and don't catch what's needed. And so what you think was just this awesome, it wasn't. And so guys will blame, the broadhead must not have opened. It failed. Well, no, it opened, but it just didn't slide through. I mean, there's always an element of luck with an arrow that's rotating as to how the blades are going to go through, and are they parallel to a vein and it misses it, or is it perpendicular and it cuts it? That's sheer luck. And, could it slide between organs because it's lined up just right? There's just so many things that are out of your control. My philosophy on broadheads and the damage that they do is, I think it should be just common sense that the more damage, the bigger the cut, just stacks the odds in your favor. Now, having said that, there's a couple different ways that you can achieve the maximum cut. One is the diameter, the broadhead, and the other is the length of the wind channel. So, which broadhead, and it probably comes down to the animal too. If you're talking about a small whitetail, well, unless you're really doing a shot, there's only so much to travel through.
Right.
So the length is kind of like the total distance. So you might as well use a big broadhead. Now, if you're talking about shooting a moose or something like that, well, maybe a smaller broadhead that penetrates farther and longer is going to actually do more damage than a big broadhead that doesn't go as deep.
Right.
So, there's different ways of looking at things, but to me, the poundage does make a difference. The arrow weight does make a difference. The bow tuning is different. So, you got to go for that whole wax.
Right. If you could...
And, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So, if you're a mechanical guy, my advice is, just stay a little off the shoulder so that if you do air towards the shoulder, you're still good and not in the bone. If you're a fixed blade fan, and you've got the arrow behind it and the weight behind it, and then you could probably flirt a little closer to putting it really in the pocket.
Sure.
So it depends on what you're shooting, maybe a little bit how you should be shooting.
Right. Kind of along that same, well, maybe not the same thought, but where, if you could pick where you hit the deer, based on all the different wounds that you've seen, where would you be aiming for? You hear some people talk about high lung. You see, everybody's like, heart shot. That's flirting with danger, in my opinion. Where's John going to aim?
What are we talking? A dead broadside deer?
Yep.
I mean, obviously that, and the angle, the tree stand, all that stuff.
Sure.
Obviously factors in. But if you're talking dead broadside and not serious angles or anything.
Yeah.
Again, I guess I'd go a little bit back to what broadhead you were using, and what you're shooting at. Are you shooting at 100-pound dove? Are you shooting at 300-pound big buck or a moose? It makes a difference. But let's say a big whitetail buck.
Sure.
I don't know. I think I would aim, and I haven't bow hunted myself in about 20 years probably, since I got too busy with the dog thing.
I was just going to say, you're in the wrong profession for that, buddy.
Yeah, it doesn't mix. I can't do both at the same level that I would want to do them at. So
right.
I had to make a choice. But I think kind of like top of the heart and a little bit off of the shoulder. You better have a very, very serious heavy bow and arrow combination with a fixed head if you're going to flirt even with a deer, a big deer's shoulder or leg. It can be done, but I've also seen it plenty of times not work. Now, you said something about top of the lungs. That to me, that's flirting with danger there, because I'm here to tell you for sure, top of the lungs is not as an effective hit as lower in the lungs. I agree with you about low heart. In fact, did one for Taylor Drury a couple of weeks ago. It looks like a pretty awesome shot. Most people wouldn't think it would go more than 200 yards, but it was one of those low heart shots. And the problem with that is you can actually even nick the heart, put a small slice on the heart, and still have that deer go a long, long ways. And low heart, there's not as much heavy arteries as there is at the top of the heart, where you got the aortic arch coming off, very heavy artery rich. So you hit there, and it's better than hitting the heart. But the low heart, I've trailed many that just went, even though they looked like pretty perfect shots, but in fact they were just a touch low, or really didn't center the heart. Nicked were down in that area. So I don't know. I kind of like the top of the heart. And my thinking was, well, sometimes the deer start to drop, to be able to recoil and bounce off when they hear the shot. And so if I was at the top of the heart and he went down a little bit, I'm still good. That was my thinking. But that's the main thing is you don't want to be flirting with the bone.
Right.
And unless you got some kind of crazy heavy setup that can actually do it in almost all cases, and that's going to take pretty serious setup.
Right. And I think
most guys aren't shooting anything close to that.
On the average, you should just stay away from that area if you can.
I think so. I think so, because again, it's the greatest margin of error.
Right.
Shoot a little too far towards the shoulder, you still have missed it. And if you shoot too far back, well, you're talking liver, or worst case scenario, stomach shot. Which, if you don't have a dog, well, then you could have a real trouble. But for my clients that got me in their back pocket, that's not the end of the world. We're in almost all cases going to get that deer.
Right.
Much more so than hitting the shoulder. Almost certainly we're not going to get the deer.
I agree.
Or high odds we're not getting it.
Right.
So to me, it's a matter of stacking the odds.
Yeah. Well, I think that pertains to a lot of situations, right?
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. But I mean, it's amazing how, and you see it in your business all the time, how often the deck isn't stacked in your favor. And
well,
that's I guess you'd be out of a job.
Sometimes I even surprise myself. As I said, sometimes I'll get calls or referrals, and I'm just too busy. But I always try to talk to the people and advise them if I can, or analyze things for them. I've just been doing it long enough. When I hear a search, I did the other day, where the guy had shot too high and too far forward, and told me what he was observing on the trail and what had happened, and boy, for it just the biggest buck of a lifetime, and desperate for me to come. And unfortunately, there was really just no way. He was a long ways away from me, and I told him, I mean, gosh, I don't want to waste your time or my time, and for something that I really don't think is going to happen. And
sure.
Sure enough, it was only a day or two later. He goes, "Yeah, I got him a trail camera."
Yeah.
So it's those flirting with the shoulder and high hits. Most cases they don't work out very well.
It's a predictable result, is basically what you're saying.
Pretty much. And now again, there's always the fluky things that happen. Somehow it does sneak through. And cuts an artery, or I've recovered deer literally hit almost in any part of the deer's body. From 2 inches above a hoof to neck shots, all kinds of weird stuff, and we happened to get them. I even got one, and this was a fluke, and it wouldn't happen with big buck, but it was, it actually was a doe, and it was hit above the spine through the back straps, through the loin.
Okay.
And that in and of itself would not have killed the deer, but we tracked it and actually came on it and jumped it. And just by a fluke, there was a huge blowdown in front of it where it was running, and it leaped over this blowdown. And I heard this crack. And what happened was, it didn't, because the big broadhead had cut a swath of that supportive muscle above the spine. When that doe hit the ground after this big leap, it snapped her back.
Oh, really?
So talk about a fluky thing,
Yeah.
but that's my point is, again, almost anything is possible. But, I deal in probabilities and possibilities. And almost anything's possible, but what's probable?
Right. One last question, and then if you've got anything to add, we can certainly do that. But it's sort of become a pet peeve of mine, and I hear it often if I'm helping friends or whatever, and they say that they've got lung blood because it's got bubbles in it.
Yeah.
Is that true? I mean, does lung blood have bubbles in it? Is that an accurate way to say that you think you've got a lung hit?
It is if what you're seeing is actual bubbles from lung blood, but a lot of times it isn't. But here's where most people confuse things, is assuming if it's a bubble, it's lung blood. Well, there's various ways you can get bubbles and not have it be lung blood. And typically, what is lung blood is very, very tiny bubbles, frothy, more froth than bubble. I mean, the bubbles are just tiny.
Right.
But a lot of times people see bubbles and they're bigger and they assume it's lung blood, and that can happen just from the drop of blood hitting the ground, and it forms a few bubbles.
Sure.
Take a glass of milk and pour it into a bowl, and you're going to have all kinds of bubbles. Well, it's not lung milk.
Right. Exactly.
So you can get bubbles in other ways, but those very distinctive, very fine foamy bubbles, yeah, you see that, and it is a pretty good indication of a lung hit. The other way that bubbles can be formed, let's say there is a hole in the chest, and so air is escaping, and it can kind of, as it's kind of wheezing through that hole in the chest, can create bubbles there, even though it's not lung blood that you're seeing. I mean, you can put an arrow through a chest and not kill a deer. A lot of guys think that so long as I'm in the chest cavity, I'm going to kill this deer. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily the case.
No, Clint McCoy, my co-host, is a veterinarian, and he'll be the first to tell you that there's absolutely no guarantee because you punch the diaphragm that deer is going to die. Just because you punch a lung doesn't mean it's going to die. Chances are it will.
Well, one lung are real iffy in my book. They're trouble because they can last a long time, go a long ways, and live. But it is even possible for a double lung deer to live.
I've heard
at least live for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep, I've experienced it a few times.
Yeah.
But again, that's weird stuff happens. It's not the norm,
right.
But it's possible.
Right. Well, John, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I can't think of anything. I think we've had a pretty nice chat.
Yeah, it was fun and educational. I got to have that question answered. The folks that'll be listening to this will know why I'm asking that the question about lung blood, and you hit the nail on the head. As far as I'm concerned, it's got to be that, like you said, that frothy, almost foamy blood with the small bubbles in it that's lung blood, but not a big bubble on top of a leaf that's got blood on it. Dark red blood. That's just by chance.
It is a pretty common mistake for people to make, though.
Yeah,
I will say that. I hear it a lot, and sometimes it's just not the case. People get fooled, and a lot of times. Oh, here's another one, very similar. They'll tell me they've actually got a piece of lung, and what they're really looking at is some coagulated blood that, consistency-wise, is a little bit similar to what a piece of lung would be, but I tell them, well, squeeze it or squish it around, and if it, kind of disintegrates eventually, then it's not lung. And
exactly.
It is so rare to see a piece of lung on the trail. It doesn't. It's so tenacious and spongy that unless your broadhead just cut the very edge of a lung and totally sliced a little piece off, it's going to hang together and nothing's going to be on the ground. I don't know if I've ever seen lung on the ground. I don't know, maybe it was once. Almost in all cases, when people think they see lung on the ground or a piece of lung, other than with a shotgun, you could get a little speck of lung. Almost all the time when I hear that, it's coagulated.
Right.
So that's another mistake, similar.
Definitely the exception to the rule. It's probably
very much
most often going to be that coagulated blood. Well, you're going to get you're probably going to get a weekend, not maybe off completely, but you're going to have a little bit of downtime before this show will air coming up Monday, and I bet you're busy next weekend.
I really haven't looked forward to what the weather's doing, but you're right. It's here. It's supposed to be low 80s for the next several days, and tomorrow, it's kind of unfortunate, tomorrow starts youth season
here
in Illinois.
Yep.
So I think they're going to have a tough road for them this weekend.
Yeah.
But you never know.
Yeah, I saw next Friday and Saturday. I usually, my career allows me to disappear for a little while. As long as I have cellular signal and an internet signal, I can be relatively present when I need to be, but generally try to disappear about the 15th. And I see when I looked this morning, the 16th and 17th of which will be next Friday and Saturday, are going to be, I think, the high in Wisconsin, at least a high of 48 on both days. So that could prove to be
happening, man.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be at that part of the year where you're probably on the outside looking in, but it's enough of a cold front to put them on their feet, I think. So we'll see if the forecast holds.
And we're things looking up here. Seems to be a year for big bucks. Things are looking good.
Yeah.
I mean, some really big bucks.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I've got one.
Pretty excited what we might see.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of good pictures, and I will definitely be back in touch if we're able to put our hands on that one, and I'll send you a picture.
Yeah, I would hear about that, and I'll tell you, I've got. Of course, I've been doing this a long time, but I got a pretty long list of people that I've tracked for, and the deer wasn't dead. We lost the deer, and then the same guy ends up shooting that deer.
That would be fun.
It would. That'd be a great story.
Well, hey, thanks for taking the time, and I appreciate it. And I had a great time, a great learning experience with you down there in Missouri. And I hope I don't need you, but if I do, I'll be definitely calling.
All right, Jason. I wish you luck with your season.
All right,
have
thanks,
fun
and good luck with yours. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. One small note or disclaimer about the track job that Tracker John and I talked about is that the way that story ended is we ended up, getting farther out on the track, and the dog was giving Tracker John a bunch more feedback, and you could just see the dog work and tell that, she was getting excited and had more confidence in that, in that the track that she was on was definitely the deer. And shortly thereafter, we ended up jumping the deer and it ran away. And since then, as I alluded to earlier, that the deer's made it, the deer's grown, and he's even bigger this year. So stay tuned to see how that story ends. Well, there you have it, another episode of the White Knuckle Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and hope you picked up a few nuggets of information along the way that you can use down the road. I want to take just a second and thank our partner in this endeavor, and that is UC Hunting Properties. Without them, this couldn't be possible. You guys all know that I work with UC Hunting Properties, and they're actually nationwide. I would encourage you, for any of your property needs, go to www.uchuntingproperties.com. Thanks for listening. Jason out.